All right. Well, with it being officially 12:35, let's get things started. So thank you everyone for coming today. This is the ACT Patriot chapter's webinar on the results of the City of Boston Commuter Survey. And just to kind of provide a few plugs up front. So, you know, the ACT Patriot chapter, we're really appreciate everybody's feedback. You know, we've sent a survey around and asked for suggestions for events, and this is one of the topics that came up. So we're really happy to be having this conversation today, and I hope that you all learned something and are ready for a good discussion. Before we get started, I just want to thank Elizabeth for helping host this through ACT National and kind of give her a few minutes to provide an update. I know she's been busy.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you virtually. I only have two quick things. You know, there's always a lot of things going on, but the two things I wanted to highlight, of course, is the international conference that will be kicking off this coming Sunday. Hard to believe that it is finally here at last. We've got about 275 people registered, so that's very exciting. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that board elections will take place following the conference. So mid-August, check for your emails. If you're an eligible ACT member, you'll get an email with a link to vote. These are very important, so please take some time to look at the bios and get to know the nominees before you head into the actual election link. But stay tuned for information about that. Like I said, that'll be after the conference, mid-August-ish. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Paul.
Thank you. And just to plug two upcoming events before I turn it over to the speakers. At the International Conference, there will be a chapter meetup during the August 2nd window. We're all at 4:15. And because none of the board are able to make it this year, Jim Barr has volunteered to lead the discussion. So we've kind of prompted him with some informal speaking points to where things stand. So hope that it can be kind of just a chance to check in with others from the local chapter and see how things are going. And the second thing I'll plug is because we are kind of expecting attendance at the conference to be light, we're planning to do a full virtual chapter meeting at the end of August. And I'll plan to get more information about that event out after the international conference and we're able to set things up. But I'm hoping to include topics in that at that discussion about health of the membership, the end of year elections, hot topics in TDM, and we've also asked someone from the ACT National Diversity Inclusion Committee to come and speak about their kind of resources and what they've been up to. So with enough delay, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers today. So with us today, we have Marissa Rivera and Scott Mullen from A Better City and Allison Simmons from Northeast Consulting Group. And they're here to share with us the results of the recently completed commuter survey in the City of Boston. So take it away.
Excellent. I think I'm up first, so it's nice to see everybody. It's been a while since I've seen some of these faces, and I'm hoping that folks are going to be in Orlando next week. I will be there, so hope to get to see some of you in person as well. But we're here today to talk about a really exciting project that A Better City did with the City of Boston. Back almost over a year ago, spring of 2020 now, A Better City was approached by the City of Boston to do a citywide employee commute survey, which would focus on sort of what the behavior was of folks prior to the pandemic, and then also looking at predicting what their future behavior was going to be, or sort of how they were feeling about their commute, knowing what they knew about what was happening with the pandemic. So we took that opportunity. This was in conjunction with the Bloomberg Energy Foundation. So this was funding that the city had. And so we worked with them to create the survey tool. We also talked to them a little bit about the idea that since we were employer-based, since we're a TMA and our members are employees, that we really wanted to take the opportunity to take the information we would gather from employees and take it back to our employer members to figure out what other opportunities there might be from an employer side, knowing that our members were considering everything on the table as a reset in terms of commuter benefits, in terms of their telework policies. We added to the project the opportunity for us to do an employer survey, which Molly's going to talk to you a little bit about today, and also doing just interviews with our employers to say, given this information that we learned about how your employees feel about transit and telework, how does that influence what you're going to be offering in the future? So we'll tell you a little bit about that too. And then just in terms of the actual employee survey design, we built in a ton of skip logic. There's everything from the very first question you answer is whether what your sort of work opportunities are right now. So if you were unemployed or retired, you were immediately kind of bumped out of the survey. Then we were really sensitive to making sure that we were asking people what they did before and after. And if you indicated that you were going to do the same thing, you pretty much ended your survey at that point. We were really interested in the folks who were, let's say, on transit and now said they were going to drive, or biking and now said they were going to be full-time telework. So we built in a lot of skip logic so that we were asking people, only the people who said they were going to do something different, questions about sort of why they were doing that. Same thing with transit ridership. We asked folks if they were on transit, if they were still feeling fairly comfortable taking transit. They were kind of bumped out. Only the folks who said, I used to take transit, but I'm not comfortable anymore, were sort of given questions about what could we do to make you more comfortable. We feel like that really made a big difference in the number of responses we got. It made what looks like on paper a really lengthy survey be something that was definitely more digestible for folks. It also, I think, really helps with the quality of the data because you don't have people that are planning to do the same thing, answering questions about why they would change. So, so that's just a little bit of background, and then I'll kick it off to Marissa, who's going to tell you more about what we found out.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. So before I dive into the data, just a quick little bit of background on the timing. There were a lot of different parts to this project, as Allison kind of just alluded to. So just to try to get the timing straight. As Allison mentioned, we were first engaged by the city through the Bloomberg Cities Climate Challenge in spring 2020. At the time, I think they'd been thinking about using some of the data to inform some of the TDM work that had been in the works for the months leading into the pandemic. But as the summer progressed, it became clear that, as Allison said, this would be a really great opportunity to dig into pre and post-pandemic commute modes and understanding how those trends might shift. So we did our first commuter-focused survey in late summer 2020. At the time, a lot of employers were talking about trialing hybrid returns to the office potentially as early as September 2020. But the data that we collected from commuters made really clear that likely wasn't going to happen. That wasn't how commuters were thinking about it. Then over the winter of 2020 into the spring of 2021, Mullen conducted 11 interviews with major employers and developers in the greater Boston area to understand how they were thinking about their commuters' potential options and changes. And then we were fortunate to receive an extension of our engagement through the Climate Challenge in spring of 2021 and used that opportunity to resurvey commuters just in May into June of 2021 to understand how sentiments were shifting now that vaccines were rolling out and return to the office timelines were starting to become more tangible. So I'll speak a little bit to the results of these specifically commuter-focused surveys from summer 2020 and spring 2021. The summer 2020 report is available on the A Better City website under publications, and the spring 2021 report is going to be published within the coming week or two, and will be available in the same place. So starting with just a high-level note on the demographics across the two surveys, the demographics in terms of race, income, and whether or not respondents had children under 18 in the home were generally in line with Metro Boston demographics for all of those categories. A thing we were really interested to see was that the majority of respondents, which was 4,200 respondents in the first round of surveying, 2,300 in the second round, a majority of those respondents lived within 10 miles of their workplaces. So that's what we think of as biking or e-biking distance. This chart right here shows the distribution from the spring 2021 data. So close to half live within 5 miles of their workplace. That's very a lot of options for how you might be able to get to work if you live that close. And then as you go out, there are fewer and fewer who live far enough away to really be thinking about having limited options for how they might be able to get to work. Between summer 2020 and spring 2021, we saw a pretty significant shift in the professional demographics that were represented. In summer 2020, we saw a lot of healthcare workers responding to the survey. Our hospital TMA members were really interested in distributing these questions and understanding what their workers were thinking. In spring 2021, we heard from a lot of our hospital members that, given the toll of the last year on their employees, they were really trying to move away from survey fatigue and from questions around kind of the chaos of commuting and moving into communications around self-care and managing burnout. So we didn't see the same level of engagement from our hospital partners in spring 2021 for really understandable reasons. But we did have a lot of responses from business professionals. So the business professional industries became a bit more represented in that second data set. For the most part, other demographics remained pretty consistent, and self-reported pre-pandemic commute modes remained pretty consistent as well. So we do see these two pools of data as pretty comparable despite that shift. So these two charts show what folks self-reported as their primary commute mode prior to the pandemic, and then what they self-predicted as their primary commute mode when their workplace is fully reopened. So we didn't put a timeline on that question. We said, when your workplace fully reopens, what do you think you're going to do? So it was open to interpretation of it there. The dark blue bars are the pre-pandemic commute modes, and the lighter blue bars are their predicted return commute modes. And the two key things I want to draw your attention to here are the drive alone rates on both charts. So you'll see in both pools of respondents that was reported at 23% prior to the pandemic. In summer 2020, a full 15% more respondents said that they expected to commute primarily by driving alone in the future. And in spring 2021, we were really pleased to see that number decrease by a good amount. So it was just a 5% increase in the number of predicted drive alone commuters. And that decrease in the magnitude of that increase is really reflective of higher retention across all of the transit modes that you can see here for subway, commuter rail, bus. A lot fewer respondents saying that they think they're going to switch away from those modes. And then we also saw in both pools of respondents an increase in the number of folks saying that they expect to bike in the future, which was great to see. And small increases, but still significant increases in the folks who think they'll be primarily telecommuting. So digging a bit more into some of those shifts around comfort on transit and expecting to stick with transit, as Allison mentioned, due to our skip logic, a very specific pool of people saw this question about which precautions might help them feel more comfortable using transit. So folks who used to commute primarily via transit, but say that they either plan to switch or are unsure about their future plans, saw these questions around, you used to commute by transit, what could help you feel comfortable getting back on transit? And you'll see that in summer 2020, people were a lot more hesitant around even these precautionary measures. They were saying, maybe this could help me get back on, 60% of people. But in spring 2021, we saw a lot more folks, 15 or more percent, saying that they would feel comfortable using transit with some of these measures in place. And the great news about that is that many of these measures are actions that the MBTA has been putting into place over the course of the pandemic. And a Better Cities position on this has been that it's primarily a marketing and communications challenge for the MBTA more than it is a shift in their operational practices. And lastly, just a quick note on key incentives and disincentives for drive alone commuters. So we asked drive alone commuters, what are the key incentives or key disincentives that could encourage you to shift that behavior in the future? Far and away, the most popular key incentive was a free or reduced cost MBTA pass across all types of previous mode commuters. And the key disincentive that came out was congestion pricing or tolling for SOVs. And one quick note about the way this question was structured. We had originally thought about doing one question with incentives and disincentives combined for respondents to rank. But received feedback that folks are always going to choose the incentives. You're not really going to get any information on what they think about disincentives with that structure. So we split it into two separate questions, but we only had about 4 disincentives to ask about. So although you see 41% of people saying that they would be discouraged by congestion pricing, they really only had a very limited number of items to choose between. So that statistic might be a little less persuasive than we would want it to be. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Mullen to get into our employer-focused interview effort.
Yeah, thank you, Marissa. There's so much to unpack there, and I know that we're going to do questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We're going to leave plenty of time for that. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. This was sort of an unprecedented effort, right? Like, how do you get information from companies during a pandemic? Nobody really knows, and there's a lot of uncertainty that is still out there around when are we coming back to work. September was the date that everybody was flagging, September 7th, and now that seems to be, given current information, maybe pushed back a little bit more. So this is a snapshot. This is a snapshot that started the employer interviews with the 11 companies we talked about. We had originally targeted 10, we had one extra and we threw it in there. Late last fall, right, really around the end, around Thanksgiving, and then it continued into around the middle of winter when we started compiling everything. We checked back with folks before publishing to make sure the data was still accurate and things were still good, but we had to get a broad swath of folks, right? If we're only going to do 10 or 11 interviews, we don't want it to be with all hospitals, right? We're going to get skewed data. So we did professional services companies, healthcare, education, financial services, consumer goods, commercial real estate, right? Those are the folks that we were able to come to get to the table. Obviously, retail and hospitality were absent from this. They just were not in any space to talk and to share, being largely shut down. About a quarter of the companies that we chatted with were 500 employees or less. Another quarter were between 500 and 1,000. And then the remaining 50% were the larger companies, 1,000 employees or more. It is notable that some companies just wouldn't talk to us beyond the hospitality and the retail sectors, simply saying, you know, we don't want to distribute a survey and we don't want to, you know, give information that we don't have right now. We just don't want to participate until we know what's happening. And right now we're full remote with everyone that can be. But I think it's really interesting that we had such good representation from the hospital sector. We have a lot to learn there. These are 24/7 operations, 7-day-a-week operations. And so this is not a 9 to 5. And so we really tried to suss out as much as we could from these conversations. The way we conducted them were 1-hour deep dives that were conducted after we had them fill out an intake form, right? We wanted them to, thank you for advancing. We wanted to get past the noise. I don't want to sit down. If I only have an hour with a VP of HR at a company, I don't want to ask them, you know, do you subsidize transit? How many parking spaces do you have? All of that stuff is sort of the baseline. And we knew early on, if we were going to get any real granular and meaty information, we were going to have all of that beforehand. So we created an intake form, which is essentially sort of a private survey for these companies to fill out. And it had about 50 questions in it. Do you subsidize carpooling, van pooling? Do you have, you know, bike racks, e-bike charging, all of the things to give us a granular snapshot of each company before we even sit down. So we knew what to ask, and we already had some stuff in the bank. And, you know, a happy side effect of this is that intake form is something that we've rolled into our general TMA operations. Any new member needs to fill that out, and that helps us understand their unique transportation needs, right? If they don't have any parking at all, either on-site or off-site with shuttles, for example, that's helpful to know. And we can craft our TDM program offerings at a very granular level. We've made that available, actually, that intake form, to other TMAs in the Mass Commute Network, and happy to share it with others. This is, I know, broader. I see Connecticut on here. I see Vermont on here. Not sure if we have all of the New England states, but this is something, don't reinvent the wheel. If this is helpful to you, we're happy to share it. Next slide, please. So what did we learn? You know, we beyond the uncertainty, there are a few things that did come out. Is like, it's going to be hybrid to start. There wasn't a single company that said on this date, our entire workforce is coming back, you know, come hell or high water, right? There was one outlier, if you read the report, one outlying company saying, we're not a remote company, so eventually everybody will be back. But I think we saw a lot of this sort of recognition reacting, as Marissa said, a lot of the employees made it very clear what their preferences were, and that was hybrid. And I think a lot of the companies that we spoke with recognize that the future is going to have to be some sort of a blend, right? And that 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, for every single employee is likely not going to work. They would be at a competitive disadvantage if they mandated that. And there was broad recognition of that. Downtown offices, and again, these surveys now, these interviews were conducted some months ago now, and we're seeing some potential new trends unfolding. But our commercial real estate partners had shared that, you know, our rents are being paid. Our office rents are 98%, right? And people are renewing, and those who are in long-term leases are not canceling, right? So everything seems stable for now while we figure out what this future is going to be. And of course, as we move ahead with variants and any new developments that come down. We'll see what happens there. But it's interesting to know that 98% figure was contrasted with about 8% occupancy during the peak of the pandemic, right? So those offices were being paid for, and they had only those who chose to come in or were essential to come in actually coming into those commercial real estate buildings. So a big sort of flip there. The reconfiguration piece, we learned a couple of really cool terms through this research process. One was de-densification, and that was the thought that we're not going to downsize our office, because I think that there was a sense that there's some risk there, right? If you just say, oh, great, cut 50% of it, and what happens if you need that space back and they can't get it? Hold on to what you got, but spread people out. Maybe you keep the non-essential folks, typically clerical, for example, for hospitals, they can all work remotely and still function properly. But for the folks that have to come in, those who work in test labs, for example, just create more space for them and create more flexible space. And the idea was expressed by one large financial institution as the development of work personas. You've got your folks that have to come in every day. You have your folks that only need to come in X times per month. And they sort of assign them a persona. And then you can actually, once you have that, it's granular data, you can start crunching some numbers around what you actually need for space. And then you can reconfigure. I think we included an image from a work bar, a downtown work bar in that report, because a lot of the companies are sort of thinking of it in that way. So we're going to have heads down work time over here, an office if you need it, a phone booth if you need it, but there'll be a collaborative space over here. There'll be sort of, those chairs that can wrap around you. You can get some stuff done, but you're in a social setting. So I think, the cubicle and the office dynamic is likely not going to last a whole lot longer. I think people are realizing now that there's different types of work and different ways to get work done. Now, the key threat for us as TMAs, right, and TDM professionals is that hybrid work models might facilitate driving, right? And we heard this loud and clear from one company's HR person saying, well, we've got 200 parking spaces, right? And, if we have some people coming in on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule and some on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we actually now have enough space. Before we had too much demand for those limited parking spots. Now we can spread those out. And that's a real threat. And it dovetails right into the value proposition of a monthly pass for transit. Will employers that subsidize continue to do that if they're then going to tell their folks don't come in every day, but they're buying them a monthly pass? And so this is a real pickle, and we have a lot of compounding forces here that really make us nervous. And because if companies make the wrong choice and they choose the easy thing for their employees, well, what happens when the next company down the road does, and the next company down the road, and all of a sudden we're back and we're worse than we were in 2019 when we were voted worst traffic in the nation, actually 2 years in a row. The only reason we didn't win it in 2020 was due to the pandemic, and we were still, I think, third on that list. So we can't drive our way back from the pandemic. Active transportation, the key thing, and I'm so thrilled to see that 48% number that Marissa shared, 5 miles or less, 48% of the folks, and we had 2,600 responses to that second survey, 48% of them live 5 miles or less, and a full, I think 73% when added together live 10 miles or less. These are viable bicycle commutes and e-bike commutes, right? Micromobility commutes. And with the burgeoning network that's going out there, not only due to the pandemic, a lot of the Healthy Streets stuff that Boston put down, Cambridge has been going gangbusters, Somerville as well, and others in the region. But also the sort of longer term stuff, the bike path development that's been happening. The Northern Strand Trail, you can get all the way to the beach in Lynn by bicycle from Wellington Circle. And that's something you couldn't do before. And, think of it as a bicycle and micromobility superhighway network. It's called the Emerald Network. It's when completed will be about 200 miles in the region. It's really going to position us well for folks who are interested to ride. One of the things that we found was that bike infrastructure was one of the key things that people were interested in. If I feel safe with separated lane or a cycle track or an off-street path, then they would actually make that change. And that sense of separation and building for those modes has been echoed in poll after poll, most notably recently in the Mass Inc. poll, where I think 70+% of people said that they were interested to reconfigure roadways, less for cars and more for active mobility, bus lanes, and dining. And so what we've seen is the transition of those spaces is something that the majority of folks, almost the overwhelming majority of folks, at least here in Massachusetts, support. And the Mass Inc. polls are statewide, not just focused in Boston, as ours was. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to pass this back to Allison. Again, there's a lot to unpack here. We're happy, anything we didn't cover, happy to cover in the Q&A.
And yeah, maybe we can tag team this one as well. But so we were hoping to have someone from the city speak to us. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us today. Just to give you a sense, again, they were sort of the client in this proposition. And so they had originally asked us to get this information. So we wanted to kind of tie it up for you in terms of what the city is doing with this information. Obviously, Molly talked about what we as a TMA are doing to help, support our members, but the city is also using this data in a couple of different ways. As Molly mentioned, bike infrastructure, one of the positives of the pandemic is that it really gave everybody pause to kind of look at what we were planning and the opportunity with people not on the streets to green light and hopefully move ahead some projects that we think are really important. Molly mentioned the Emerald Network. So the city of Boston is definitely looking at additional bike infrastructure, bike lanes, protected lanes, wherever possible to make that connection seamless so that we don't just drop people from a bike lane into, a terrible intersection, which has historically been the case oftentimes in Boston. Also, in terms of the collaboration with the MBTA, similar things have happened with bus rapid transit lanes, a lot of projects that were in the works to make buses faster and get through city traffic were able to progress over the course of the pandemic. And that's something that we see folks returning to transit through the survey. So that's really an important piece. Molly mentioned some of the pickles that were in with the MBTA stuff, mostly around fare options. And so that's something that this survey can help us kind of speak to, that folks are looking at a hybrid model, that we need to be flexible in terms of what our fare options are. And as Marissa mentioned, marketing with the T, letting people know that they're doing all the right things around safety is something that the city and ABC have been working on conversations over the last several months. And then in terms of the TDM points program, so in parallel with this survey and this Energy Foundation grant, the city was in the process of redoing their transportation demand management requirements for developers. So prior to this, any development over 50,000 square feet, whether it be a commercial development, residential, or institutional, was required to put together a TDM plan, essentially. But over the years, that had really become sort of a suggestion basis. It was a case-by-case basis with each planner sitting down with the developer and sort of saying, here's the things we'd like to see around TDM. And it became a negotiation. So some were really strong, others were really weak. So to kind of combat that, the city has now put in a points program similar to, I don't know if folks are familiar with, San Francisco has a program like that, whereby each parcel, each development is given a mobility score based on how close they are to transit, how walkable they are, how close they are to bike infrastructure, and then they need to create a TDM program that meets that mobility score. So the folks downtown have a higher mobility score because they have every option available to them versus folks a little bit further outside of the city center have a lower mobility score. And it includes a lot of the incentives that we see that employers offer, that employees are looking for. You can get points for doing, MBTA subsidies, you get points for unbundling your parking, you can get points for carpool incentives. So they need to build a program around. So this survey really helped in our conversations with employers, I think really helped to understand what's doable. A lot of times, as most of you probably know, TMA members tend to be more engaged around TDM conversation than some other employers, but we know it's possible to offer transit subsidies. We know what happens when you offer transit subsidies. So using these as best case practice scenarios as we're going forward with other employers and developers who may not be quite as familiar with TDM. Molly, did you want to add anything about the collaboration with large employers or anything I missed on bike or MBTA?
Well, I do, but before that, I just want to say this TDM points program, it brings transparency, it brings accountability, it brings standardization, all the things that a lot of times is not there in city government, right? So this is huge, and we're really thrilled to lean into this. It's so funny. I joined this team a little more than a year ago, right, in the middle of a pandemic to do transportation demand management, right? And there was a real question. I was like, is there going to be anything to do, right? Obviously, the work has taken on a new urgency because we have the opportunity to actually carve out the channels where people are going to flow, right? The programs, the policies, and the physical infrastructure. We have the chance to use COVID as a catalyst. This TDM points program is one more way to sort of turbocharge that for new development that's coming down the pipeline, and we're thrilled about that. The collaboration with large employers, a lot of them we found through our intake form, not only for the survey, employer survey, but also through our broader TMA membership. A lot of folks already have different programs in place, and that's great, but many don't, right? And many still subscribe to that sort of, well, if you want a parking spot, we have subsidized parking. If you want to ride a bike, there's a bike rack, right? That's a completely inequitable distribution of HR resources, and we're really pushing hard on the parking cash out, right? Whatever your mode choice is, well, here's your budget. You get $200 a month, everybody gets it, and then you do what you want with it, and that brings much more obviously saliency to the cost of your commute. But it empowers individuals to make better choices. We've seen that time and time again. And so we're thrilled about that. But the collaboration with the MBTA is really, as Allison said, we're pretty happy with the way they're going from the Ride Safer campaign perspective. They're working on a 3-phase marketing plan to really welcome folks back to the T, and that is already launched. And so we're thrilled to support with that. But the fare piece has to change. And so we're working very closely with them on what that might look like. And we're not the only ones. There's a lot of advocacy groups. It's a rich network down here in Metro Boston. And we're all seemingly pushing for the same thing. And so we'll see how much success we can have with that. I had one other sort of really granular point, but I'm going to guess someone's going to have a question about it. So I'll wait. And I think we'll wrap up this portion just in the interest of time. It's 1:07 now. And Paul, do you want to take it back? Are you going to moderate a Q&A?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to. I did want to let everybody know they can enter their questions into the chat box. And actually, it's a small enough group that if you have a question, please feel free. Elizabeth, can everybody unmute themselves if they have questions? Okay.
Yep, they sure can.
Maybe to kind of kick things off, maybe to Marissa or Allison, can you let me know like what the biggest surprise from this process was for you?
You might have different ones. Marissa, you go first.
Oh gosh. All right. I was going to say I might need to think about it for a minute. No, let me think about it for a minute. Do you have one ready to go, Allison?
I think because in the first survey, because we had so many employees that were in the healthcare industry, I was surprised to see how many folks were still on transit during the pandemic, still really relying on that as a mode. And I think pleasantly surprised from the first survey how many folks said they were planning to go back to it. Like I walked away from the first survey feeling like if we can figure this out, we're not going to be in as bad a shape as we thought. I think everybody in the early days of the pandemic thought either people are going to work from home forever now, or people are going to, completely abandon transit. And what we found even in the early days of the pandemic was, people appreciated having the transit options and wanted to figure out how to get back on transit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Allison. I think I have maybe two that come to mind. One is related more to outreach and the other one's a bit more related to data. So for the outreach component, I would say in both rounds of surveying, I was surprised to see who really responded to the call to action to distribute and provide feedback through the survey and who didn't. So during the first round of surveying, I mentioned we had really great engagement from our hospital members. And I was a little bit surprised to see that. Thinking back to last summer, I wasn't necessarily confident that commute-focused survey questions would be such a top-of-mind, high priority for some of those large institutions. And then during this last round, I think I was surprised to see that our developer members responded really, really quickly to the request to distribute the survey questions. They tend to be among our less engaged members just in general when it comes to programming and meetings and things like that. So to see that so many developers, I think within an hour of my sending out the survey this last round, I saw a few hundred responses come in from some of our downtown developers. So that was surprising. And then in terms of a data insight, I think some of the biking data specifically was really interesting to me. During the first round of surveying, we saw that, if as many people, so the number of people that predicted that they would primarily commute by bike moving forward, if that number really acted on that prediction and really did commute primarily by bicycle in the future, they'd be meeting the city of Boston's Go 2030 mode share goal for cycling. So that was, again, a really inspiring and motivating data point to see that, these people are here, they want to be making this choice, we can be meeting this goal. It's about providing the support and guidance that they need to actually act on those predictions.
And if I could just follow up with that, the city of Boston Transportation Department heard it loud and clear. They made 6.5 miles of their temporary facilities permanent, literally with concrete and curbing, and are continuing that push forward, not just on bike lanes, but also on the bus lanes in coordination with MBTA. And that's happening throughout the region as well. So we're heartened. I mean, this has not been easy for anybody, but we're heartened at the trends that we're seeing. We just got to fan the flames.
Great, thank you. I think the other thing that struck me, do you get the sense that people's commute, so seeing telecommute only being 3 or 4% of people's planned commute post-pandemic, that indicated to me that probably people are going to, it was probably almost hard for them to decide what their primary mode is. I just get this feeling that people are going to be balancing their work schedules and whether they're at home or in the office throughout the week. Is that the sense that you also got from maybe the interviews and from the survey responses?
Yes, I would say from the survey response side, the primary mode was defined as the mode that you would use 3 or more days per week. And I think a lot of folks are expecting telecommuting to be potentially more on the 1 or 2 day per week side. And then this deck doesn't include a couple of charts that are in the report around folks' self-reported preferred future teleworking frequency. And the vast majority of respondents said that they wanted to telework a few times per week as opposed to every day or less frequently than a couple of times per week. So I think it's about how many times per week that's happening and it being kind of on the cusp or just under the primary mode.
And thank you. And I'm going to move on to Holly's question unless anybody else wants to respond. So Holly raised the question that seems like a great time to expand the park and pedal program. And Holly, just make sure I get the program definition on that, but that's a program offered by DCR to be able to park at some of their underutilized parking lots, like along the parks, and let people basically spend, maybe we'll call it half their commute driving there and then finish their commute by biking in. So I don't know if there are any plans to expand that, but if anybody knows of anything, please feel free to answer.
Yeah, this is going to be key. And that network that I talked about, the Emerald Network, really is a regional network, and a lot of it is operated and maintained by DCR. Park and Pedal, I think, has a few dozen locations right now. I believe they have plans to expand. I'm not in the discussions with DCR around that, but when we think about the breakdown, right, the 73% of folks that live 10 miles or less who could conceivably bike or e-bike from their home all the way to work, that's not everybody. So there's another 27% that live 11 miles or more. And that's likely not going to be feasible for them. But coming in close enough and then parking, for example, at the Herder Park parking lot along the Charles River, and then having your last 4 or 5 mile commute being that beautiful pathway along the Charles River to downtown, you're keeping the congestion and the greenhouse gas out of downtown where it hurts most. And then you're getting a little bit of exercise and a mental health break. Cycling is fun, as we all know. So that's a huge part of this. And I know that Park and Pedal, in addition to wanting to expand to additional locations, they are working on a way to actually connect people who may not have bicycles to connect them with bikes at those locations as well. So yeah, Holly, spot on.
Feel free to type in additional questions. I'm going to follow up with another one that I was thinking maybe Mully, to your interviews with the employers. I get the sense that during the whole COVID time, it's really been a time for employers to kind of like turn their focus inward on their own operations and maybe lose sight of some of the more collaborative efforts they've made, such as helping people commute sustainably. You know, do you have any advice, or did you see any opportunities through these interviews to engage with employers and your members to kind of keep that collaborative spirit alive?
Yeah, I mean, like most things, a little from column A, a little from column B, right? You know, I had a very frank discussion with one company that said, you know, why would I pay for commuter rail passes for these 100 employees anymore? It doesn't make sense. They can all come in and park because we've got a big garage. And even acknowledged and said, well, you know, that doesn't really help the T, you know, in this, you know, dire financial time, but, you know, what are we going to do? And well, I had an answer. I gave him 10 things he could do, right? I mean, this is not rocket science. But there are, I would say that particular response was an outlier, but it's there. It's definitely there, and it's concerning, and it needs to be addressed. I would say the thing that heartened me most was the sort of level of engagement. We really tried to get high up. We got C-suite if we could, we got VPs. We wanted folks from HR. We wanted folks from the sustainability office, right? We're trying to connect the dots where companies might not see connections. They might see silos, and we're trying to bridge that gap and say, oh, you're coming to the meeting, this is great. You should also bring this person, this representative, this function. So, you know, I get the sense that obviously climate change is top of mind for a lot of companies. I just don't think that we're 100% there yet on the ability of TDM to help them achieve their sustainability goals. And I think more than 50% of the companies that have filled out our intake form have said, yes, we have a formal sustainability plan, and but they're not talking to HR about it. And so we have to help them make those internal bridges. Yeah, mixed bag, but mostly optimistic. But we need to do a lot of that work for them.
Well, thank you.
I would just jump into and just say on the positive side of it, for at least for one of our teammates in Alston Brighton, what we found is from a shuttle perspective, from that last mile transit for the folks that were running shuttles, it's been an opportunity to reset and to have a collaborative discussion. We're hoping we're actually doing that at the end of this week, so we can follow up and let you know. But that's the one part where I feel like the pandemic has really helped us kind of reset. There was a lot of employers that were running individual shuttles for their employees, and with this new model of hybrid are feeling like, is that worth the couple $100,000 investment to continue to run a shuttle? So we're using that as an opportunity to kind of get folks to potentially consolidate those shuttle systems.
Thank you. Let's see. I guess the other question I had is, you know, at this early stage, it's honestly, I find it reassuring to see the 2 survey points, because you're starting to create a trend line that I think, like you said, paints a much more positive picture for people's choices as they come back. But with them being not an everyday on the same commute style, do you see this translating into new TDM programs, or have you had any discussions on new ways to kind of cater to employees who are commuting by different modes each day per week?
I can just jump in real quick. I don't know about new programs, but I know on the T side, in the terms of the flexible fare, I just recently was having a conversation. Mully was on vacation. He's usually on that call. This was our business folks talking to the T about what we need. And the T had done the math that basically if you're pre-tax, which most of these employers are, 3 days a week is your break-even point on a monthly pass. And I think that's what we're seeing, is most people are thinking 3 days a week, but I think that math hadn't ever been put in place before. And I said, that's sort of the headline. I think that's what we really need to lean into, is it's your most flexible option still, right? It's not cheap, but it's still your most flexible option. And at 3 days a week, you're still breaking even on that pass. Because we know the T is not going to be able to probably produce a fair product in time for this re-entry back into work. So I think we really need to lean into the story that this is the most flexible, still the best value. And that's without any subsidy. That's just with pre-tax. So you add in the employers that are offering a subsidy, and then it really does become still your best economic option. So it's really more about sort of repackaging and remessaging on what folks should be doing than necessarily new programs. Although Marissa, you could talk about the Blue Bikes thing that we did at the beginning of the pandemic for employers. Hospitals.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. That's a great point. I was going to just also say that, along the lines of existing programming, being a good fit. I think from the A Better City and Austin Brighton TMA sides, all of our programs have always been structured to encourage folks to mix in new commute modes a couple of times per week. So it's never been about, you have to commit to one thing all the time. It's always been, we can support, a choice that you're making a couple of times a week. And then Allison's great point about the Blue Bikes program. So we worked with Blue Bikes in the city of Boston in the very early days of the pandemic to offer free 30-day Blue Bike passes, courtesy of Lyft, to workers in essential industries, so hospitals, grocery stores. I think those were the two major industries. And through that program, which lasted over the course of the summer, we got a bunch of folks riding Blue Bikes to get to work, which was great. People really responded to the promotion. It was really great to see. And two of the major hospitals that participated in the program through A Better City TMA then opted to become corporate Blue Bikes members to offer their employees subsidized Blue Bikes memberships on a permanent basis going forward. And I'm the administrator on both of those programs, who have seen pretty great uptake on both programs among folks who are biking to work. And from the data we had previously, weren't logging bike trips prior to the program being available. So that's been a really positive shift to see.
And if I could make one, this is not a programming comment, but it's something that came out of this process where we were leaving retail and hospitality. They just weren't engaging. But what about mom and pop? What about the Main Street stores, right? What about the really small, like no one with 10 employees is going to join a TMA, right? But how do we aggregate them? And we're working with a couple of different Main Streets groups, Alston Village Main Streets, Brighton Main Streets, to figure out, is there a way to offer a bulk membership, a single membership that any one of your members can then access the Go Mass Commute benefits from? And that's something that we're having discussions with the city, the Main Streets team, and the individuals as well, because we need to push this out, because right now we're just working with the biggest developers and employers. And so how do we get this out to everyone?
Cool, thank you. And I guess maybe the last question I have is, all right, so you've done 2 iterations of this survey. What questions would you add the third time through if you had the ability?
That's a great question. We've been living with this series of surveys for a year now. This was supposed to be, at the beginning, it was envisioned as maybe a 2 or 3 month effort. And as Marissa mentioned at the top, the second commuter survey was added on. Additional funding was found to run this again, so we can sort of bookend the pandemic. And as we're about to release that data, I hadn't thought that far ahead. You stumped me. Okay. I don't know if anybody else has anything.
I would just say, I think what we're struggling with now, and I wish we had a little more insight into how employees would feel about, is more around the scheduling. So I feel like right now all employers are just saying, you employee can come in 2 days a week and you get to figure out what those days are. And I think to make that hybrid model successful, we're going to need to be, employers are going to need to be much more prescriptive around that. And so I would want to know how employees felt about that. In other words, if I get into telling you you're a Tuesday, Thursday employee, you're a Monday, Wednesday employee, so that we can span out at least traffic and parking and resources, how employees would respond to that, or if that feels at this point like we're taking away some freedoms.
Yeah, I think, to that same effect a bit, I don't know that we could have added this question to these surveys, but having a more specific understanding around just timing in general, I think has been something that has felt like it's missing. So, over the summer, we didn't ask folks when they thought they might be coming back. We allowed that to kind of be an open-ended thing that they could take into account as they answered questions. And then also thinking about even daily schedules. So are people thinking about 9 to 5 still as the days as the times that they'll come in on the days they come in? Is that going to be, are there going to be widespread shifts in what morning rush hour and afternoon rush hour looks like? And getting into some of those details, I think, would be helpful for thinking about future commuting and traffic patterns.
Cool, thank you. That was one of the questions I was coming up with, because on the traffic engineering side of the world, they're saying that daily traffic volumes are the same as they were pre-pandemic, but you're not seeing the same peaks in traffic during the AM and PM, and that it's spreading a little bit. So that would be my guess too. And I mean, you know, as soon as you get a series of questions out there, you do kind of get answers, and you're not sure what if it's telling you exactly what you think it's telling you, like you said with that disincentive question. So I know that's something that's always tricky up front. Well, good. Well, we really appreciate you all taking your time today, and want to thank you for doing this work and being willing to share the results with us, and kind of answering the questions that we came up. You know, and so does anyone have any parting thoughts or questions that they want to share? And that can be panelists and attendees, honestly. It's kind of an open question.
Well, I would be remiss if we didn't thank our partners in distribution for this. You know, we weren't the only ones pushing this out. Obviously, we had other TMAs in the region. We had the city of Boston and our internal partners within companies that made sure this got to the end commuter, which was huge. The thing that was most heartening to me through the process was that collaboration. And again, if anybody on this call would like to see a copy of the questions that we administered 2 times to commuters, happy to share that. Our intake form, happy to share that. It's really helping us get a bit more granular and methodical about the work that we're doing, which in turn makes us more effective, which is the goal, right? And so we're happy to share that far and wide to anybody. Just email any one of us on this list on the screen in front of you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye all.